Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for making the time to join into today's session, which will be focused on the topic of what Buddhism says, or what the doctrine says about suicide. So today's session is sponsored by Mahal Ratnasiri and the family, Lakshani, Manik, Samadara, together with Mahal's children, Rishika, Shan, and Emil. So thank you very much to the family for sponsoring today's event, Dhamma event. And Shari Mahal is very close to the Dhamma Center. She acts in the capacity of our treasurer and has been immense strength with all the operations that we have going on at the Dhamma Center. So without much further ado, let us begin the session by chanting Namo Tassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahatu Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahatu Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavatu Arahatu Samma Sambuddhassa. All right. So when it comes to this very controversial topic of suicide in the context of, or within the context of Buddhism, we have to, of course, base our understanding upon this subject through the very relevant information which has been spoken of, or which can be seen within the early Buddhist text. And what I mean by early Buddhist text is in reference to the Pali Canon, of course. So within the Pali Canon, we have several accounts of suicide and how the Buddha dealt with the subject at the time. But before I do carry on with the presentation, something that I would like to sort of guide your attention towards is can you see my screen? Yes, lovely. Is this presentation has been compiled and will be presented in the simple light of sharing a theoretical light upon the subject of suicide. Bodily, verbal, and mental actions rooted in compassion is in every case suggested by the teacher. In dealing with cases such as which concern depression, suicide, or any other mental affliction of a person or within a community, whether it be a family unit or otherwise. And what we would always, in good practice, would suggest is to listen, care, support, and to always seek professional medical care when you know a person or a person within your family or family that you would know of is going through such unfortunate circumstances. We do understand and know that this is a very touchy subject for a lot of people, being that suicide is a very serious conversation and something very serious happening all around the world. Now, I have picked up these statistics from WHO, the WHO organization, as at the 13th of September 2021, with an estimated 3.8% of the population affected, including 5% among adults and 5.7% among adults older than 60 years of age. Approximately 280 million people in the world have depression, and in serious cases can lead to suicide. Over 700,000 people die due to suicide every year. Suicide is the fourth leading cause of death amongst youth between the ages of 15 to 29. Barriers to effective care include a lack of resources, lack of trained healthcare providers, and social stigma associated with mental disorders. In countries of all income levels, people who experience depression are often not correctly diagnosed. We know this happening too often. And others who do not have the disorder are too often misdiagnosed and prescribed antidepressants. Now, the rest of the presentation will be done not as a presentation, but as a talk. But it is very important to note that these circumstances are very unfortunate. And it is always what I would always recommend when you come into contact, or if you know a person, even within your own family, who might be going through depression of any order. It is very important to deal with these persons with the help of healthcare professionals, as well as also to approach the subject, even to talk about it, to do so with a great amount of compassion. And to mind not what the community or society says, but to give first priority to taking care of the person who might be going through it, because the experience can be sometimes very hollowing. And to put another pressure or burden upon someone who might be going through such a dark experience, such as, what will the neighbors think? What will my friends think? This cannot get out. Putting such unnecessary and very foolish, to be very frank, very foolish burden on a person who's already going through a traumatic state of mind within is, I would say, is not in the spirit of Buddhist values, and not in the spirit of true human values. So by saying that, I would like to now progress on to the topic of the day. When we talk about suicide, suicide is a topic which arises in a number of areas within early Buddhist texts. Some of these areas would include, we know, the Parajika. The first Parajika, which has been spoken of with regard to the monks of Vesali, who the Buddha promulgated the first rule of the Parajika, which is not to kill or to take life, or to also condone the taking of life, meaning hiring thugs or whatever to murder for you. All falls under that offense, which was promulgated to the monks of Vesali, which coincided with the laying of the Parajika. Then we have the Channa Sutta, the Gotika Sutta, the Vakkali Sutta, the Anapanasati Sutta, the Piyajataka Sutta, and the Koda Sutta, which all give accounts of practitioners who suicided, killed themselves, right? One account in the Piyajataka Sutta is an account where it was not concerning monks, but it was between a couple, where the couple was so in love with each other that the man killed his wife and then killed himself in hopes of being together in the lives to come, right? In lives to come. So we have these accounts, and within the commentary, these accounts within the Pali Canon, and within the commentary, we have the stories of the Sappadika Bhikkhu, and the story concerning the Yamaka Maha Pratihara, which all give accounts of, with regards to Venerable Purana Kassapa, which all give account of suicide. But when in Buddhism, when we discuss suicide, the most detailed account of suicide is given through the Channovada Sutta. The Venerable Channa, the Sutta, which is the advice which was given to Channa by Venerable Sariputta. Now, to shed some light, because this is going to be what is going to be the foundation for the rest of the talk. The Venerable Channa was a monk who was, who was going through a very, very daunting illness, leading him to be in a lot of pain. Venerable Channa was together with Venerable Chunda, or rather Mahachunda and Mahasariputta. The word Maha mentions that they were both enlightened beings. So Venerable Sariputta, knowing that the Venerable Channa was in so much of pain, comes into the room where Venerable Channa is ailing. And also he's crying out in pain. He's going through so much of pain, unbearable amounts of pain. And when Sariputta enters the room, Venerable Channa expresses his need to use the knife, right? That is the way that it is put, to use the knife. And Venerable Sariputta, of course, says, do not use the knife. What is it that you want? Do you need food? Do you need someone to take care of you? Do you need water? Is there any medicine that I can get you? What is it that you need? Name it and I will bring it for you, and I will myself be here taking care of you. And Venerable Channa says, Venerable Sariputta, all of that which you try to provide, I already have. I have food, I have water, I have medicines, but it is not bringing me any sort of relief. This pain is unbearable. He goes on to, of course, speak about his pain. And the two engage in a Dhammic interaction where they discuss about non-self, where they discuss about not identifying with the phenomena at hand. This is not the time to go into a detailed analysis of the contents of the discussion, but as Venerable Sariputta expounds Dhamma, Venerable Channa too expounds Dhamma, and Venerable Sariputta leaves, and as Venerable Sariputta leaves, Venerable Channa uses a knife and commits suicide. Venerable Sariputta takes a message back to the Buddha. And the Buddha says, Sariputta asks the Buddha, Bhante Bhagava, where do you think the Venerable Channa has gained rebirth? Because Sariputta doesn't believe that he has attained enlightenment. And the Buddha says, Sariputta, didn't Channa tell you that he was accomplished? Didn't he say that he had attained enlightenment? And then when Sariputta says yes, then Sariputta, Venerable Channa's act of taking to the knife or using the knife is blameless, right? Now this sentence it's more or less that is the same way that it is translated. Now, this sentence is what creates a lot of controversy within the Buddhist world when it comes to the conversation, the discussion, the debate about whether suicide is something which is condoned by the Buddha or whether it is not condoned by the Buddha, right? And that is also what, within the duration of this talk, that I wish to sort of share some views taken and gathered from different authors, and of course my personal study as well with regards and concerns to this subject. Please know that after the deshana that you will have time for question and answers, and any question and answers that you have are most warmly welcome after the session. I'm sorry, bad throat. All right. Now, to go to Parajika, we know that a monk cannot kill, neither can we get someone to kill. Should a killing happen, a murder happen, the moment the murder, there are certain, it's a very detailed subject, a subject that we can talk with the details available. We would have to have at least a 5-week session just upon the subject of murder. We have so much of detail within the Tipitaka and different sort of connotations and details that the Buddha goes into about how a murder can be committed. with gruesome details. That is what I love about the Buddha. He's so specific, has not laid down anything for imagination. It's all there. So to read to you the Vinaya promulgation, just to give you some sort of light to move on with our discussion today, is: should any monk intentionally deprive a human being of life, or seek a knife bringer for him, or speak in praise of death, or urge him towards death, saying, "My good man, what use is this miserable life to you? Death for you is better than life." With such a thought in mind, such intention in mind, in various ways should you speak in praise of death or urge him towards death. He is one who is defeated and not in communion. Meaning, should this be done by a bhikkhu, at that moment itself, he is no longer a bhikkhu and can never be a bhikkhu from that day onwards up until his next rebirth as a human, right? Up until his next rebirth as a human. Now, within the context of Venerable Channa, we have to come down to the reasoning where Venerable Channa, there are conversations which takes us, or details within the Tipitaka which takes us, and which has led many scholars over the many years to debate this sentence which I alluded earlier, which is that his act of taking the knife is blameless. The question is then, would an enlightened being ever take to the knife? Right? I mean, that's a bit obvious. Would an enlightened being take to the knife? Would an enlightened being commit suicide? And the most direct verse that we would find within the Pali Tipitaka, which gives us a clear-cut idea of what an enlightened being's mind is like, is Venerable Sariputta's Udanagatha. Where Venerable Sariputta, I will read it out to you later on, but for now, where Venerable Sariputta says, having reached enlightenment, I do not crave for life, nor do I crave for the end of life. Having attained enlightenment, I do not crave life, nor do I crave the ending of life. Right? In the Metta Sutta commentary, which is again reflected within the Vishuddhimagga, it speaks of a person who has not enlightened but reached the Metta jhanas. Right? This person, it is said, this person who is endowed with loving kindness, should murderers come into one's house and give you the ultimatum, you decide who gets killed, whether you will die or whether another person will die. You decide, and the murderers give you the ultimatum. It is said within the commentaries that a person who is endowed with metta, who has the practice of metta, who has or who is accomplished in the metta jhanas, would be unable to reach a conclusion because the thought itself does not arise to him to say, I should die, nor does it arise within him that another should die. The thought does not arise, period. Because metta, the practice, is regarded in both ways, to you and to the people around you. It can never be cultivated in a way that there is no metta towards you yet you have metta towards another person, nor can it be cultivated in a way that you have metta towards oneself and not towards other people around you. It's a process which is nurtured through wisdom. And that wisdom to play what, or to sort of allow metta to unfold by the spirit of that wisdom, has to be related to in a way that is selfless. That is the bearing by which wisdom and knowledge is clearly differentiated, isn't it? The wisdom helps one to end samsara. Why? Because wisdom, prajna, discernment is all about the understanding of the inner workings of nama and rupa, hence the understanding of non-self. Little by little, the non-self builds up, but from day one, there will be a sense of non-self. Even in the act of dana, you have non-self there. Whereas wisdom does not have that, whereas knowledge, jnana, does not have that same advantage of non-self. I hope that is clear, right? If we now move on, then the question comes, what I would ask is, okay, did the Buddha condone the act of channa? Here we have to clearly, and first of all, understand, because this talk is in English, understand English, right? To an extent of being able to understand the difference of condoning and exonerating. Do you understand? Keep these two words in mind, condoning and exonerating. The Buddha in his statement does not seem to condone the action, but exonerates channa of blame. Then who is going to blame channa? Is then a question that would arise in my mind. I hope it arises in yours as well, I'm assuming. Who is going to blame channa? Now, this is again a part that I love about the Buddha. He is a very logical man. I'm calling him a man, Superman, right? He's a very logical person and never tied up to the concepts of Buddhism, society, religion, or anything of that. He's a very logical person. And you find that even within this sutta very clearly, which is, where can blame come? Think about it. If I do something which is wrong, body, speech, or mind, how is it blameful? It is blameful by meaning not that Mother Nature or some sort of God is now going to come behind me with a plague. The blame is the karma resultant, which makes the action something which should not be then sort of condoned or even supported in a way, because the word blame relates to karma resultant. Where else is the blame going to come? The blamelessness mentioned within the story of channa relates to the idea that channa is not going to be reborn. Now comes the attribute, why didn't Sariputta believe that channa was not enlightened? Sariputta is no fool. Sariputta, when told, the Venerable Sariputta did not believe that he was enlightened. Then the question appears, at what point did Venerable Channa attain enlightenment? The answer to that question, the commentaries, the sub-commentaries, and other sort of authors spend light on this fact, owing to the fact that Arahant from Venerable Sariputta's Udana would not seek death or solace through death. Because of that fact, Venerable Channa, at the point of picking up the knife and using the knife, it concludes that he wasn't enlightenment at that time, but reached a state of enlightenment at the point or whilst the action was in process, meaning from the time the body was cut open. I'm very sorry for being so graphic, right? From the time that the body was cut open. This is what the commentaries add on to the sutta. Hence, at the moment of death, Venerable Channa was enlightened, but not at the moment of the first cut, if you understand what I mean, right? This is seen in relation to many sutras and events mentioned within the sutras and the Vinaya Pitaka, where monks were not enlightened at the point of dying. Now, by dying, what I mean is the starting of that initial process. But with that process of being killed or dying, they attained enlightenment through the Satipatthana practice. Through the Satipatthana practice. For example, a good example for this would be a monk was meditating in jhanic bliss, and he woke up from the jhana prematurely, and to see that there was a forest fire, and it was burning through the forest behind him. He had stayed or spent so long in jhana that what happened was creepers had gone over his body whilst he was in his seated meditation posture. When this happened, now a rule that is present within our monastic code is the fact that monks cannot break or sort of cut plants, right? Now this monk, even if he was to die, he did not want to break his monastic code, the Vinaya. So out of that, he sat or he remained within his seat, went into meditation, the fire grew closer, and as the fire was now devouring his body, if I might put it that way, devouring his body through the practice of Vedananupassana, the Venerable attained enlightenment and died in that same seat, in that same posture, burnt with the forest. Now, there are indications of this sort of thing all throughout the Tipitaka with relation to when monks put their own lives in jeopardy to continue with their monastic practice and the practice of Vipassana enlightenment, right? Hence, coming down to this topic of did the Buddha condone or exonerate? The Buddha exonerated, never condoned, because the person who committed the act was no longer blameworthy. But I find it a little bit particular that the Buddha did not directly promulgate a rule against suicide. There is no rule against suicide. The closest rule which comes to suicide is this. There was a monk and he jumped off a cliff. He wanted to kill himself. He wanted to commit suicide. That's not the reason I smile. Having jumped off, what happened was he did not fall off the entire cliff, but he went and landed on some merchants who were basket sellers. And having fallen on the basket sellers died, he did not die. The rule which was promulgated was not a parajika, not a Pachitya, Sanghadisesa or any of that. The rule that was promulgated was a dukkata, an offense of wrongdoing. The first level, right? If we are to sort of put the seriousness of Vinaya rules onto levels, Parajika is right on top, dukkata is right on the bottom, right? Killing is a Parajika. But now at this instant, having by accident fallen on these basket merchants and having killed them, it was a dukkata. So the rule was promulgated not onto the fact of suicide, but it was promulgated over the fact of having jumped off without looking, which caused harm to another's life, which is an entailment of an offense of dukkata, which is very particular. I'm not going to give you my personal conclusions about it, but I find that very particular because the Buddha has not promulgated a direct rule to say that suicide is an offense of wrongdoing or suicide is something that a monk should not do, because that is essentially what an offense of wrongdoing is. Now, there are 5 reasons within the canon which would point to us as to why a arahant would not commit suicide, right? Would not commit suicide, which is, first of all, with regards to this specific sutta, which is more powerful and detailed sutta we have on the subject again, there is no reason to think that the exoneration of Channa establishes a normative position on suicide, because to exonerate from blame is not the same as condoning the act. 2, there are textual reasons for thinking that the Buddha's apparent exoneration of Channa may not be an exoneration after all. Right? That is where the blameless topic comes into question. 3rd, the commentarial tradition simply rejects the idea that an arahant would ever take his own life. 4, if we assume, along with the commentary and the secondary literature, that Channa was not an arahant prior to his attempt, then to extrapolate a rule from this case such that suicide is permissible for arahants is fallacious. The reason for this is that Channa's suicide was, in all significant respect, the suicide of an unawakened person. The suicide of an unawakened person. 5th, suicide is repeatedly condemned in canonical and non-canonical sources and goes directly against the stream of Buddhist moral teachings. It goes against the core, the aspects in every way of Buddhist teachings. An arahant in question is unable to commit suicide, and he will not. An arahant is a manifestation. An arahant is a manifestation of the most purest mind available in samsara, in a universe. When that sort of a mind, having no tanha, craving of whatever sort, would not commit suicide, because of course it goes against the 5 precepts, those core values which forms the basis of the monastic code, and moreover human nature and values. It goes against human nature and values. Studies of karma suggests that when a person comes into a decision to end one's life, This draws parallels with other very serious offenses that a human could do to oneself, which then sparks a reaction within that person's individual karmic bank, if I might say karmic bank, where this person would now commit similar actions of self-denigration, which includes mental and physical, mind and body, not only in that specific birth, but also in many births to come. Hence, going on within that cycle, somehow bringing that specific task which was committed at the end of that person's life, and which raised that rebirth linking consciousness into the next, that proceeds from that second life onward up until the person finds some sort of deep solace, some sort of deep relief from that state of mind, probably by some sort of understanding of Dhamma or understanding of life, maybe. That is what the karmic tradition would then sort of teach us. When you would die with that consciousness, what comes about in the following births as well would be a similar instance. Because that is exactly, remember, it is not Mother Nature going against you, or any sort of spirit or demonic spirit going against you. It is your own mind who clinged on to that occurrence, that powerful mental state at the time of death. That creates, this is not something that we would do every day. This is not something that we would have done a lot of the times in samsara. But when committed and done, there is a repetitive effect which comes into effect in future births as well, bringing about more danger in sort of doing such a thing. That is what the Buddha's karmic tradition teaches us about how this sort of an act can bring about those consequences for a person. When we go into modern examples, right, of such kinds of unfortunate incidents, we have the story of the Venerable Jnana Veera is something that we cannot oversee. Venerable Jnana Veera, a British national, he ordained together with Venerable Jnana Moli, who are very well-known names in the Buddhist world, isn't it? We've all heard the words, names Jnana Veera and Jnana Moli. If you're a Buddhist, if you come from Sri Lanka or any parts of the Eastern world, you know these two names, Jnana Moli, Jnana Veera. Venerable Jnana Veera was based in Aldershot, in the Aldershot military base. He worked for the Secret Service together with the Ministry of Defense. Venerable Jnana Moli was also working for the Secret Service. They met each other while both of them were posted to interrogate prisoners from Italy, right? And they developed a friendship based on Dhamma. Venerable Jnana Veera and Venerable Jnana Moli ordained under the late Venerable, the most esteemed Venerable Jnana Ponika at the Island Hermitage. Now, Venerable Jnana Veera was a Cambridge graduate. He was a very, very smart individual. He was a graduate in modern languages and mathematics. Venerable Jnana Veera, leading to after his ordaining at the Island Hermitage, grew to be a hermit very fast. He whilst he considered Sri Lanka to be, this blessed land, he also pointed out in many of his letters that that the way that Buddhism has been taken about in Sri Lanka was quite unfortunate, in his own words. Regardless, Venerable Jnanavira commits suicide, right? He commits suicide. He was a very pious practitioner, no joke. He was a very pious practitioner. He was a very strong practitioner of meditation. He was going through an excruciating amounts of pains. He had a lot of stuff that were happening with his body because he was an austeric practitioner. And one fine day, his good friend who sends food with his in the hands of his servant discovers the body of Venerable Jnanavira lying lifeless inside his kuti. He died in Bundala Forest Monastery. His kuti is still there. Monks are still staying there. It is an isolated one bungalow. It was a very small, simple bungalow. Now, Venerable Jnanavira, with regards to his suicidal thoughts, what he wanted or what he was specifically struggling with is lust. It was very difficult for Venerable Jnanavira to come over or to overcome the lust that he had. So he was such a strong practitioner at the same stage. He was such a strong practitioner that it was either liberation for him or it was death. There was nothing else for him in this world. He did not want to return home. He did not want to do anything else. It was either liberation or it was death. And with the weakening of his body, he decided to take the latter option, right? Before his last attempt at suicide, which led to his death, he had attempted suicide 2 times prior. 2 times prior. But of course, it had failed, right? So we find this account being spoken of by Daniel Kyon, who is a primary figure within the scholastic world, which comes to question, who has done a detailed report, a study on Buddhism and what it says on suicide. And what it comes to say is, when the Dhamma is held, when the Dhamma is worked with, it is very important to grasp the Dhamma from its right end and to practice it in a way that does not harm one's life, but to work with life itself in a way that brings about the fruitions that you or one would desire. Life in Buddhism, Venerable Achan Brahm says, I cannot see the reason as to why in Buddhism we have the Parajikas, right? Because Buddhism is a religion, or rather a way of life or a doctrine, whatever we might choose to call it, which is rooted in the aspects of forgiveness. However, Venerable Achan Brahm's quote, however, the Parajikas give a sense of non-forgiveness to those who have entailed upon this offense. Some other theories go on to say that the taking of life is the only sin that you cannot come back from. Because when it is taken, it cannot be given back. Once a life is harmed, it cannot be unharmed. Life in Buddhism is seen as the most valuable asset available to a person on a path towards enlightenment. As much as enlightenment seizes life in all of its context, mind and body and the planes of existence as a whole, it is life which allows one the ability to one day mature one's mind, to bring one's mind into a position where one is now able to truly contemplate the reality of the world as a whole, enabling this mind to now attain to what is enlightenment. Whatever suffering that a person goes through, mental or physical, this is very important to be laid out. To not underestimate the value of one's existence in this world. To not underestimate the value of one's existence in this world. Most often, when crippling depression takes over a person and they experience the most darkest parts of this world, of this universe inside their heads. And never, something that I've really learned myself is never assume that you know what they're going through. Never assume that you understand what they're going through. You don't. You really don't. Always supporting a person who might be going through those stages. Supporting a person by first listening. Not essentially trying to be a teacher or a guide, but just listen. The hallmarks of one's value within this life can never be regarded by one's own, because most often when death comes, when suicide takes its toll, the people who we leave behind, they cripple far beyond the stages that sometimes you crippled. We know people, I personally know people who've had to go through suicide, or suicide of a child or of a parent, and decades upon decades they have been struggling with coming into terms with that unfortunate incident. It is not to be joked about. It is not to be taken lightly. It is not in good taste to take such conversation pieces for your Saturday afternoon mid-brunch. These are very serious and very sad occurrences in life. When we take all the pain that we have experienced in the world, the pain that we experience right now, I mean, have any of you experienced pain as we have gone through? As we have gone through this amount of pain all around the world, whatever that pain might be, for a person who has the tools of Dhamma is able to turn that pain into something that motivates you to now truly grow away from the pain by cultivating the path of Dhamma within oneself. Because how else are we going to escape the pain in all realistic conversation? How else are we going to escape the pains that are brought about by the cycle of rebirth and death when we are constantly putting ourselves into a position where we crave new rebirths, crave a future brighter and brighter and brighter. The thing is, bright does not exist without the dark. Happiness does not exist without pain, and vice versa. Pain is a very important aspect of our practice. The pain that the Buddha underwent through his time as a bodhisattva, perfecting the paramis, further reinforced the need to attain enlightenment in the future. Further reinforce the need to truly find a way out of the cycle of rebirth and death. And the only exit that he found is its complete annihilation, which was Nibbana. How else This spectrum of life that we live in, the spectrum is so that we will never have pleasure without pain. We will never have pain without pleasure as well. We will never have happiness without dukkha. We will not have dukkha without happiness. The mind, seasoned by Dhamma, allows a person to find a balance of mind, not through the external world, but the internal, through the aids of the external world, might be in certain circumstances, but really internally to find ways and reasons by which one now reaches state of balance in mind. That mind we relate to as yonso manasikara, right attention. Right attention. I could, with a great amount of confidence, tell you, if we were, or if you were, or if children were taught impermanent suffering and non-self in its true aspects, that will now act as your resilience builder, your strength builder against all of these forms of mental illness, protecting you from the mind going into those deepest ditches of the mind, to see and experience those darker states that no one would enjoy experiencing. Within Buddhism, we find the keys to free ourselves from these sorts of afflictions. That would be true for you, and that would be true for yourself, as for your children or anyone else as well. The Buddha's teachings brings the mind to now not regard self-worth in what you might assume through unfortunate instances and circumstances that one might have had to go through, but it now brings you down to the realistic notion of what your self-worth is, to your realistic context. To your realistic context. A lot of the children around the world with social media or whatnot have this idea that if they are not living like the influencers that they often see on Instagram or anywhere else, that their lives are not quite up to par. But in realistic terms, it is not so. So how do we keep our minds, the minds of those who we love, within a context, within a practice, within the upholding of that which is true and realistic? The practice of Dhamma. The practice of Dhamma. The understanding of what is impermanent, of what is suffering and what is non-self within this course of life that we live in. Within that existence, within that practice, we then find true reasoning that would enable us to go deeper into what we call or recall as the four satipatthanas, leading to insight and, of course, liberation. Insight and liberation. A lot of the times, after the damage has been done, we find ourselves then trying to sort of fish back into Dhamma. Remember, when your self-confidence is hurt, sometimes it's very difficult to come into terms with Dhamma as well, because you hold on to Dhamma with that level of lack of self-confidence. So rather than wait until the last moment, up until you really need it, practicing it from the get-go, practicing it, relating to the realities of life from the get-go, helps a person to actually build a proper foundation, which would help the person to live a healthy and a happy life. Understanding that the spectrum upon which we all live. Understanding the spectrum of which we all live. It is true in terms of people monks such as Venerable Jnanavira, all the monks that have been mentioned, and even the lay people who have been mentioned within the canon, and of course the 250 million people all across the world who might be going through these daunting states of mind, coming through the fact, maybe in most circumstances, feeling as if they cannot do it anymore. I mean, what more of lack of self-consciousness, what has related to that difficulty? Within that family, the lack of support or whatever it might be, even with support, because the face of, there is no specific one face for suicide. It is not a person who cries every day, who is the only person who ends up committing such an evil act upon oneself. Even people who have families, even people who would be considered loved by the entire world. Elvis Presley, isn't it? You know, loved by the entire world. People who seem like they have accomplished something. There are so many who suffer inside. So what can we do? Compassion. What can we do? Giving, making people, it is not our responsibility. It is not yours or my responsibility to make people feel comfortable, but it is my responsibility to know what I am putting out into the world. Through my verbal deeds, through my physical deeds. What am I putting on to the world? The phobias that we might be pronouncing, the inequality, injustice that we might be pronouncing, the lack of care or compassion that we might be pronouncing, the lack of acceptance that we might be pronouncing. All of these things, if changed for the better, can in one way or the other save a person's life. If not done, it can also relate to one person down the line, committing such a heinous act towards oneself just in or feeling not worthy of life. Not worthy of life. We have a question. So if you have any questions, you can now sort of put forward your questions. You can unmute yourself and ask a question that you choose, or you can put it down in the chat section. With regards to the monk focusing on Vedananupasana at the moment of being burned by the flames, was he contemplating on impermanence of the feeling, or was he being aware of the Vedana? Thank you, Bhante. So, Kumi, what was happening at that moment was a contemplation of the dissolution of the feeling. Right? I hope that is clear, Kumi. The contemplation of the dissolution of the sensation.
Bhante, that is the anicca sanya, that is the pain coming and going.
That is bhanga of the Vedananupasana. Meaning, when we take an experience, whether it be a sensation, a consciousness, a chaitasika, or whatever it is, okay, let's talk in regards to Satyabhama, mind, Vedana, or Kayanupasana. In any caliber of those experiences, there is an arising, a processing, and a passing away. Right?
Yes, sir.
Being able to focus on one specific part, and that part is the bhanga, which is the dissolution. Upada titi bhanga. The monk's focus at that time was the bhanga moment. Right? So the falling away of the feeling.
And you can say the feeling activenawa like that. You can see the feeling coming and passing away.
Well,
or the changing of the feeling.
Well, at this position, remember the monk was already a jhanic practitioner.
Yes.
At this position, in the beginning, we need to see the arising, the processing, and the passing away.
Yeah.
When we come to that level, right, we can see specific parts of that experience.
I see.
within this part, in the story of this specific monk, it was the Banga moment, the dissolution.
I see. So basically, Bhante, we have to step up our practice on the Vedananupassana. No, basically, now at that death moment, if we are to apply this, yeah, yes,
of course. I think the reinforcing, it doesn't necessarily have to be Vedana. However, we do see on many accounts of monks or laity passing away with reason of acute pain, we see Vedananupassana in most of these circumstances being applied.
Yes,
right. We see Vedananupassana in most of these cases being applied. So yes, it can come as a handy practice at that moment. However, it must be trained before and built up to that moment to be able to, because remember, for a person who has a high Atma Sanya, will not be able to practice Vedananupassana or any Anupassana at the last moment. Why? The Atma Sanya brings the person back to what the person is losing rather than the present.
Yes. Yes.
At the moment of death, we can be thought about what we are losing, where we are going. The present is a spiritual moment. Being within the present is the most difficult.
Yes.
Right?
Understood.
So building up a practice which will allow a person to now be within the present, regardless of which Satipatthana is key.
Thank you, ma'am.
Is key. Thank you, Kumudi.
Thank you. Much merity, ma'am.
Any other questions that anyone would like to ask?
Can I ask a question, Bhante? Sorry. If I don't know it's anything to do with suicide, but sometimes you end up in a hospital and the doctor says the children have to make the decision to turn off the machine. So I'm sure they will not like it, but they'll have to take that decision at some point. So how does that affect them? Is that something not relevant to this subject? Forget about it.
I think Mahal, that is euthanasia. Euthanasia is, a subject which has been contemplated. Euthanasia, and of course, is assisted dying, and these topics are very much a part of this subject. I quite like the arrangement Singapore has, which is the person has a form to fill out before the person, way before a person is hospitalized for anything. And the form would give that person, or who is a person who is dying or in bed or who is in a coma, it would give the onus to the person to make the decision, taking into regard the financial situation or whatever situation of the family. And I think that's a very, very good way to go, Mahal. Right? I think that's a very, very good way to go. And with regards to, oh, Mahal, you put me in a bit of trouble.
Bhante, I have a question too.
Now, with regards to the children picking, making a decision, it is quite a difficult question to answer, because taking into regard the circumstance which the family is in, and also, of course, the fact that not everywhere has the arrangement Singapore has, puts a person into, or puts the child into a very difficult circumstance in terms of the Buddhist outlook, right?
Yes.
But here, something that is mentioned within the Abhidhamma, within the Dhamma is this, within the Vinaya is this. for the karma to be that of murder or that of taking life, there must be an intention to rid a person of life, right? To rid a person of life, which is known as the Theya Chitta. Theya is killing or to rid of life, Theya, right? If a decision is made through the consciousness of Theya Chitta, that is what would then translate into the karma. Now, if I, of course, haven't had this experience, but let's say that I have to make that decision with regards to a family member, right? And say I am the only person to make that decision, just to put myself in a situation, I'm taking my... Now, if that is so, the volition which would root the consciousness, which would make the decision, for me personally, I'm speaking from my outlook, wouldn't necessarily be the taking of life. It could be, but it doesn't have to be that consciousness of taking the life. Because if you would see, there are many reasons a person might say, okay, to a doctor, okay, take him off or whatever, right? And that is necessarily saying okay doesn't necessarily make you a murderer. However, saying okay, does it also give you the attribute that you are now taking or killing your parent or something of that sort? The Theya Chitta is what comes into focus all the time. I believe that other consciousnesses could be present, other types of consciousnesses could be present in the making of that decision. But that is only my outlook. Don't follow it. Right? That is only because, I mean, if we take an example, sometimes, you know, we have to make decisions, but yes, the decision does have a result. It's a very difficult answer. It's a very difficult question, right?
Yes, understand.
It's a very difficult question. And what I would say is, if it's a child, to avoid making that decision, ever. But the thing is, sometimes we can't avoid it. Mm-hmm. Okay, Mahal, thank you for
Thank you very much, Bhante.
All right, yes, Devika.
Bhante, here in the US, there is an option for us to make the decision. Like there is a form that could be filled and say, like if you're in a, if it is a terminal illness, or I mean, if you're in an accident and they put you on the life support and you're not going to recover. So we have the option to make the decision signed by a lawyer that my wish should be fulfilled. If that happens, why be on a life support if you are not going to recover? How that, because is it bad to make a decision like that? Is it a sin for me to make a decision like that?
No.
Because unnecessarily, you don't need to be on a life support, prolonging your suffering.
Yes.
What do you think?
I mean, we must take into account also the fact we must be very careful here, because we have to take into account also the potential of a person surviving after life support. A very close family to me, after being in Singapore, life support for 2 months, the father recovered, you know.
Oh.
Now, however, this is a question of, do I entail a karma in making that decision? No, you don't. Right? Because again, Devika, what I just mentioned to Mahal, you're not making the decision telling yourself, oh, I want to die. You're not.
I have already signed a document like that because
Sure.
I don't want to be a burden.
Sure. See, now it is not the fact, it is something else. We have to really, where it really comes down to is the volition.
Mhm.
Is the volition. Now let us say finance is no issue. Now let us say finance is no issue now.
No issue.
The issue is finance. No? The biggest issue is finance. Of course, there is also the fear of suffering. Let's say finance is no issue. But now you make a decision out of a mind of animosity or friction. That will have a karmic effect. But if your mind is in the right place to say, look, I don't want to be a burden, or I don't want to suffer in this manner or whatever, then that is not a teya chitta. The karmic resultant for a murder or taking of life of that sort can only come about with the mind to take life away. Right? Now, your example is again a good example to say we make the decision not always with a mind to take life.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that is my answer to you, Devika.
Okay.
Okay. Dear. Yes, dear.
Right. Am I audible, Bhante?
Yes, you are audible. Oops. Sorry. Dil, unmute yourself again, please.
Okay. It's okay, Bhante?
Yes.
Yeah. So my question is something related to what you said, but also what Mahal and Devika said. So the question is that in England, I know Devika was talking about the States. In England, one of the things that has come about because of the COVID is old people like us, right? We suddenly have to realize that, my gosh, life is very, uncertain now, and you don't know when you might go off, and the children are all over the place, and all this kind of thing. They are not even in the same country. You may not have family, and so we have been. I'm talking of people of my vintage and our work colleagues. We have been looking at this question and looking at it in a way of everybody knows about wills. Our parents wrote wills, but in England we have something called LPA, the lasting power of attorney, which I didn't know anything till we had a group meeting of batchmates around the same age, and they brought it. And this is really where it comes in, because this applies. The will comes after you die, and you can express, like what Devika says, your last wishes. And that was also very interesting for me, that I had never thought of, where do I want to get cremated, what do I want to do with my ashes, but all those things are included in the will. So they actually ask you, when you die, do you want a doctor to confirm that you're dead? Do you want to have your ashes, or do you want to? So you really think of, I never thought of these things. And so you got to think, where will your children be? Do you want? And then they say, no, it's all right. They can fly across the seas and bring your ashes in a pot. And in days of COVID, are you going to ask them to do that? So there are implications. But the lasting power of attorney is very important. Those are for people, and it gets cancelled when the will comes into force. But in that particular case, so when you die, the will then whatever you're told in your will comes in. But till that time, if you get a stroke, or if you get, in some way incapacitated, that you can't speak or you can't voice, then you actually appoint. So you have a financial one separately, but you have a health one. And in that one, you actually say that in the case you get something, that you appoint a power of attorney. It can be a husband, it can be a children, a good friend, anybody who is going to be responsible for the decisions. And so that I find very interesting, because you have to have someone you trust who will know that they will know right in their best interest. And you can tell them beforehand what you want. So you will always have an attorney who, somebody very close whom you can trust that they will do their wishes. Having said that, my own cousin in Sri Lanka passed away about 2 weeks, maybe a month ago, and she was 90 years. She lived a very good Dhammic life. And long ago, she had planned, until the end, she was quite, she had slight memory loss, but basically she had a carer, but she could do most things, and her life was good quality. She had lived it the way that a person who was practicing Dhamma would have lived. And she had told her, she had no children. Her husband had predeceased her. He was a doctor. She was not. She had told her children that they would, her nieces, her 3 nieces, her sister's children, that in no way, that she's 92, she's lived a very good life. She's done very good wholesome acts. She just wants to go. Nobody's going to run and, stick needles and revive her. So it was all fine. She was getting weaker. But the last 3 days before her death, they knew that something had happened because she was very, very different. And they just to wait and not do anything, even though she has been telling this story for the last maybe 20 years or 25 years, was very, very difficult. But at the end, they just held their hands and, in 2.5 days, I think, and then everything came in, and she wanted to be cremated within 24 hours. So it can be very difficult. Now, these were nieces, not even your children, because she didn't have children. So I'm glad that you're saying that because the Sayya Chitta is not there, you didn't really mean to kill. And, somebody has written in the wills in that particular case. But even now, when you write your LPA, you just give the power of attorney to whoever whom you are given, and you can select even more than 2, and they have to then come to a decision to do whatever they feel is right, whether to put you into a, into heart-lung machine, or whether you're going to extend life or put the power off. But I've also known my own sister-in-law's brother, when it happened, and the doctor in a motorway accident came and told, there's no point, he's a vegetable, and we are going to put it off. At that time, this is about 30 or 40 years ago, and it was so sudden that they couldn't even think, and before they knew. And that father never got away from that, and he died of heart attack 6 months later, because when the doctors came and said there's no point, they couldn't even think at that time. So this can, I wish, I know you were saying, Bhante, that you have your own kind of views on this, but I wasn't clear after what you told about the Buddha story. So I understand what you say. So it doesn't exonerate somebody, but that he didn't condone. He only exonerated, but didn't condone. But karmically, we also have heard people saying that if you commit suicide, you have taken a life by volition, and that karmically that you will get. And when 2 of my nieces wanted to do veterinary science, Bhikkhu Piyadasi, who was in New York Buddhist Vihara, was flown down to tell them that once you're a vet and you have to kill these animals who have, like horses who have broken their limbs when running and all kinds of things, that once that comes into your chitta, that then it's very likely you'll be born, as a soldier or as a meat seller or something. And these 2 children who were very bright and who were going to veterinary college, which is more difficult than medical college, both because of the Dhamma teaching given by the Venerable Monk, they both decided they were not going to become vet. So there is something, I think, that you also agreed, that if you have a chitta like that, had accepted killing to be a part of your life because you happen to be a vet, that can get, handed over, put it under chitta, and then go on like that. Am I right in thinking that that's what you also say, that if you do things like that, that the chances of it repeating are also like that? Did I hear you, understand you correctly, Bhante?
Oh, well, you said a lot of stuff, Dil. I don't know what to say yes to and what to say no to.
Okay, let's break it. So
No, I got you. Yes, there's a repetitive case. We do not have account to say that if you do this, you will become a soldier. We don't find that anywhere. But what we do find is a repetitive aspect of the same action repeating itself through births. That is something that we find. Right? For example, in the case of suicide, where suicide can repeat itself for a number of births afterwards. But yes, the Teya Chitta is what has to or comes into question when we continue to sort of see by the mind by which we have sort of, whether we have committed the act or not, the volition to take life. Now, thank you, Dil. If we move on to Pushpa, and afterwards we'll come to Shriyani. Very quickly, Mangala has asked, Isn't it Panchanantariya for the children to make that decision? Did not understand Theya. Yes, it is Panchanantariya. That is why, if in any case that you can avoid your children making that decision for you, you must make all due arrangements for that decision not to be made by the children. It takes away a lot of stress from your children. Is it Panchanantariya? Now, for it to be Panchanantariya, again, there would have to be the clear motive to take the life of the parent, right? To take the life of the parent. Now, when the circumstances and conditions are not, now this is something to look at, or even to sort of ponder, or when the circumstances or conditions are not present, they're not present, then at the dissolution of life, the responsibility cannot be put over or onto another person, right? Cannot be put onto another person. But if now in the making of the decision, if the decision is made in a way to sort of say, oh, good, let's kill her. Now, for sure, that is a Teya Chitta, with no question about it. And surprisingly, things of this sort also do happen. Especially, unfortunately, we have to discuss these things, but unfortunately, when money comes into question, inheritance comes into question, these sorts of things, the extents to which people go to for inheritance and all of this sort of nonsense is just sad, really. Now, a parent, like what Dil mentioned and Devika mentioned, and what I mentioned by Singapore, if the parent is, of course, able to make the decision before and empower someone else to make a professional decision, that would take away that stress from the child. But for the murderous karma to sort of affect a person, or for it to be Pancha Anantariya, the Teya Chitta must exist with the parent as the object. Right? If it is not so, then there is no Pancha Anantariya. Pushpa, yes. Shriyani, you can go afterwards. Pushpa.
Yeah. Bhante, some depressed patients have quoted, I'm a Catholic, I won't commit suicide. So is there a strong view in Catholicism about suicide?
Yes, I mean, the life that God has given you can only be taken away by God, but not by you.
Right.
Yeah. Here, thank you for bringing that up, Pushpa, because I forgot to mention that. I was having it in my mind, I forgot to mention it. Thank you for bringing that up, Pushpa. Now, in the discussion of suicide, the question comes, or one of the debates which are brought to light is the fact of my body, my choice. True, very much. However, Buddhism operates on the grounds that your life is not your own. Right? For example, let's take myself. I have to be very careful in this talk. Often I would take you as examples, but this time I'm taking myself. If I am to take myself as an example, now, if I would say, okay, my life, my car, my petrol kind of thing, it is not so, because my life is interconnected to so many other people's lives. Right? My life is interconnected to so many other people's lives. So me harming myself is also harming all the other people in life. That's one part of it, but that's the most trivial aspect of it. The other part is the compilation of mind and matter that we have as individuals is a compilation that has been built up not by God, according to what we believe, not by God or any other phenomena, but the fact that, of course, karmically we have brought the functions and features required to grasp information, and we have grasped that information from the society that we live in, including our parents, our sisters, our brothers, and that plethora of relationships. So the grounds to which we say that our life is our own, in this sense, is drawn to say, no, it is not. That life that you have cannot be drawn, or that conclusion cannot be taken in a way to say, okay, just because it is you who is breathing, that you can just take it, stop breathing just because you like. That doesn't naturally happen. This is in line with human nature more than anything else, right? More than anything else, this is in line with that sense of human nature, right? For example, just as we questioned, when we leave people behind, especially, with acts of suicide, the people who are left behind, mothers, fathers, for decades upon decades, they question, what could I have done? What could I have done? Right? That is such an evil thing to leave behind for your parents to contemplate on for the rest of their lives. Where did I go wrong? What could I have done to change it? Right? So suicide is considered in that respect a very selfish act. But whilst we say so, we must also say that the human mind can go into Pushpa. You're a psychiatrist.
Yes.
Pushpa, I have to tell you about the experiences that some of these people have with regard to the darkest parts of their being, with depression and clinical depression. It's right now we have, of course, psychedelics and all these substances coming into play where, certain sort of resources are present to help people out. For some people, the drugs work. For some people, the drugs don't. Some people don't have access to proper doctors. Some people, I had one of my devotees I took, he was going through a lot of stuff. I myself called his family and took him to the doctor, and I sat outside, right? And I remember this doctor was completely useless. I mean, over the fact that this boy was going through something, the doctor was now putting her views upon this boy, right? Which was not the reason that we went there. And we find this mispractice going on again and again. The darkness of the mind you do not see up until you have really gone into that state of depression, right? So sometimes these people who do have those experiences, death is not, for them, it is far more than just selfishness. They have no other option, it seems like, for them. Because no one is able to give them a cure. They wake up every single day feeling so bad, right? Which then brings me to then question, why did the Buddha not lay a ground rule on suicide? Because it happened. The Buddha did not lay or promulgate rules for instances that did not occur. And suicide happened and he did not. What does that say? Right? I am in no way insinuating that suicide or condoning suicide, but my particular question is, for myself, and of course what I'm going to research on, is the fact that why did the Buddha not promulgate a clear rule for suicide? We don't have one. We do not have one, right? So this is something that is a question, because I feel like it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis, right? Because for some people, drugs help. For some people, they don't. It doesn't, isn't it? Right? For some, the treatment works. For some, the treatment doesn't. For a great amount, the treatment does work, and it helps a great amount of people. However, there are some people where the treatment does not help. Right? So I think it is a discussion to be carried on with great amount of sensitivity and a great amount of compassion. And if we know anyone who has gone through or who has had to experience these sort of hollowing experiences, we must really deal with those circumstances and individuals with a great amount of compassion and with a lot of wisdom, right? Shriyani, yes, Shriyani.
This is something I think relate to the wills, what Dil said and Devika said. In England, we have something called living will, which you can write with a solicitor. How do you like to be treated in the case of you are in a situation that you are unable to make decisions for yourself, and which I have done and signed, but they said it to be done when you are in a sound state of mind, which I bit worried and scared now, thinking whether, because I was in a good state of mind when I made the decision, can that be a kind of it's a wrong decision? If it's come to, if it's like a, is it like a, I'm signing my own suicide?
Yeah. So is the problem that you now doubt the decision that you have made?
At the time that I made the decision, what I had was, I did not, one thing, I didn't want the suffering. The other thing, I didn't want to be a burden to the children. And also, if, yes, those were the main things that I want to make the decision with. But when you ask other things coming to, and then you start thinking, was the right decision at that time? But that was right for me at that time. Yeah. And I still do feel it still.
Okay. If, again, coming back to the Teya Chitta, Shriyani, if that is not there, and if it is consideration and comfort for the inevitable, then it does not mean that you are signing for your suicide, right? That you are signing for your suicide. It does not mean so. And there are no guidelines within Buddhism to even sort of, to sort of anticipate that. Just imagine the Bodhisattva, right? There was a story of this sort. Now, we are a bit over time, but that's okay. I feel like, let's answer the few questions and, whatever. The Bodhisattva, remember the story where the Bodhisattva is meditating in the forest. The thieves come, right? And they now want to kill the Bodhisattva, the Buddha, Gautama Buddha as a Bodhisattva. And the Bodhisattva says, no, don't kill me now because I'm yet to attain, or go into jhana or whatever it is. It was jhana, of course. And he takes a boulder, he carries a boulder and he sort of crashes, drops it on his feet, right? And crushes his feet. Remember that, Shriyani? We spoke about this before, I think, also. And now, because of that, the Bodhisattva was going to die because he was bleeding. He was bleeding. So what he told the thieves was this. The thief said, no, we are not going to leave you alone because you will go, and, tell the king or whatnot and we'll get caught. And the Bodhisattva said, no, I am not going to move. I'm going to be here, but I want to meditate a bit more, right? So then, now take that instance. The need was not to kill oneself. The need was to buy time, right? So that, and the taking and the crushing of the feet itself is what killed, right? The Bodhisattva with the bleeding and all of that, right? Now see, that is not an example of suicide. That decision was made with regards to buy time, so to attain jhana and then die. I think that gives us a better context in a certain way with some of the questions that we have. The consciousness which has to be present is you need to have it in your mind. I am killing myself. I'm going to end my life. Right? Think about this, smokers, right? Now, when you smoke, you're effectively reducing your lifespan, right? Jeff Bezos, when he was young, his grandmother was a strong smoker, a smoker. Yeah? She smoked a lot. So something that he did was he calculated on a piece of paper with the amount of cigarettes that she smokes per day, how much she has reduced her lifespan, right? And gave it to the grandmother. I mean, right? And the grandmother, of course, was absolutely devastated, and she apparently quit smoking after that, right? But as a little child, he calculated how much it was. Now, it is not about Jeff Bezos, but I just want to mention the story. But regardless, smoking kills you. I mean, on every cigarette packet, you have that sort of cancer thing, isn't it? You know it's going to kill you. Coca-Cola is going to kill you. Toxins are going to kill you. Meat kills you. Fish kills you. But we eat it every single day. The intention is not to kill oneself. But if, let's say, you know something is poison, the chicken is poison, and you're eating it now, knowing that it's going to kill you. Now that is going to be, if it is you're taking it with the intention to kill yourself, that is going to be suicidal. That is going to be karmic. But not these sorts of things when it comes to the wills or any of that.
Okay.
Right? Because what is important to you at that time of making the decision, I suppose, is
Yes.
comfort.
Yes.
Thinking about the kids, consideration for both yourself and for your kids.
Yes.
It is nothing to do with what murder or suicide is. Is that understood, Shriyani? I hope that is infinitely clear.
Yes,
Yeah?
thank you. Yeah.
Noeline, yes, Noeline.
Bhante, what exactly do you mean by saying suicide as self-sacrifice?
Could you remind me the context to which I said
Yeah,
so?
what I thought was like Channa you mentioned, and he was in real agony. He committed suicide, and so were the other two bhikkhus like Makkala and Godika. They committed suicide, and the next birth they attend Nibbana.
At that very birth.
Yeah. So does it mean that? Does it mean that? I mean, it looks very much the exception to the rule. So does it mean that suicide must be acceptable in certain circumstances if it leads to a non-attachment?
Wow. Okay, I'm a bit I'm a bit cornered here. Okay, sticking to the teachings of the Buddha, Buddhism does not condone suicide to or at any circumstance. The enlightenment of these monks happened during the process of death, after the cut was made, not before. And that is true to all those bhikkhus who attained Nibbana, right? On a Buddhist basis, it goes against the core values, human values and Buddhist values, to commit or to take suicide as an option. My personal belief is that there are certain circumstances at which compassion is required and necessary when it comes to people who do commit suicide, because they might not feel as if there is any other way out or any hope for them, especially when it comes to inflictions of the mind. However, within the Buddhist teachings, we don't find that the Buddha condones suicide in any way. Okay?
Thank you, Bhante.
All right. Thank you, Noli. So to bring everything into a sense of summary, Buddhism does not condone suicide. An enlightened being does not kill oneself or wish to end one's life. Suicide is something that is very intricate in its nature, and sometimes we do not understand the reasons for it or why a person would commit an act of suicide. It is not black and white in most cases. And it is very important to look at our basis, our stance, and what we put out into the world, which might cause another person to be affected by it. Just as we spoke about group karma, where what we put out into the world sort of manifests in the same way, this is also something to be thought about, contemplated. Drawing from that, many, when the Buddha says within the Channovada Sutta, where that condoning or the lack of, condoning, it was also a hit onto what was then practiced within Brahmanism, which was self-sacrifice, which was a practice in Brahmanism where one would go into meditation. And actually, even in the Tibetan world, much later on, it was still practiced, where monks would go into meditation under the ground, boxed in wooden boxes in the meditation posture, and they would go through a process of mummification underground. They would be buried underground. BBC did a whole documentary on it, right? It was also the Buddha's way of hitting back at practices such as those of the time, right? So that is a summary of today's talk. If, of course, I would urge everyone, if you have children, work in a way that you do not have to give your children the ultimate decision of whether to put you on life support or to remove you for life support. That would be such a blessing for your children, right? To not make that decision for you, right? So you decide. And in any case, preparing for your last days is a good thing. And it takes off a lot of stress that could come afterwards. Some people die without wills, and the families fall apart afterwards when they've left behind wealth that has not been allocated properly. Some people, families fall apart deciding what color the velvet within the coffin is or should be. It's better that the decisions that you make in order to save those people that you care about from coming into a state of conflict. So that is a summary. Yes, Soumya, we can take one last question. Soumya?
Thank you, Bhante. It was just a comment rather than a question, if I might. Thank you. During my training as a psychiatrist, we were once also brought, we also came across this piece of work done by a sociologist called, a sociologist, I believe in the 19th century or possibly the 18th century, by a French sociologist by the name of Durkheim. And he describes suicide in 4 ways within a social context. And the one that has really stayed with me is the one about altruistic suicide, which essentially is when, I suppose, you commit an act that would result in your own death, hoping that it brings the betterment of, or for the benefit of someone else, perhaps like we see in some of the Jataka. So I just wanted to make that comment at this point, Bhante. Thank you.
Where in the Jataka, Soumya, have you seen this?
I considered, say, for example, situations where, now I might get the name of the Jataka wrong, but you know, where, for example, you know, in the Jataka where the Bodhisattva was a rabbit and he would sacrifice his life, you know, to ease someone's hunger, or that was my
Yes.
that was what I was thinking of.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Soumya. Thank you. All right. So today's, thank you everyone for joining in for today's discussion and of course talk. I hope the contents that have been discussed have in some way illuminated the prospective thought pattern of Buddhists within this topic, which has been a very controversial topic for many years, for decades on decades, really, not even decades, even more. You know, this has been a topic which has been discussed and no proper conclusion as to sort of its validity within our practice has been reached. But I think compassionate action and understanding is very important. Pushpa mentions the monk who sets himself ablaze, which happened in Burma, which happened in Sri Lanka, I remember, which has happened in, I think even in India, I remember it happened in India as well, in a couple of countries. Please know that all of those demonstrations are not respected within the Buddhist world. None of them. I remember I've actually been to the place where the monk set himself ablaze as a aloka puja for the Buddha. And even the monks in his monastery were not very appreciative of his efforts. The questions such as what Soumya brought up, these are things that we have to discuss in greater detail. However, know that this sense of altruistic suicide is something that we need to sort of really think about. Maybe we will have another occasion where this subject will come into discussion. So thank you everyone for joining in. I would like to very much thank Mahal for sponsoring today's event. Mahal has been a great support to me, the Dhamma Center, in terms of being the treasurer, the accountant, and she wishes to share merits with her mother, late Mrs. Tekla de Silva Kalupahana, who passed away some 19 years ago, and her father, late Mr. Bernard Henry Kalupahana, who passed away 30 years ago. All together, she sponsored the event together with her sisters Lakshmi Kularatna, Manik Ratnasiri, Manik Terera, Samadra Fonseca from Australia, and of course her children, Sean and Emil. So we wish all of them the very best. May with all the merits that we have accrued through our individual practices, through all the doing of good that we have been able to do, and through the hearing and the sharing of Dhamma, may all these merits be shared with Mahal's parents, wherever they might be. May these blessings become A blessing on to the life they lead. May they be surrounded by Kalyana Mitras to lead in the path of Dhamma and to attain Nibbana. And may this message also be shared with all of you attending today's discussion, and also making an effort towards enlightenment in your ways, in your practice. May all these blessings protect you and guide you along this path towards deliverance, towards Nibbana. May we also share all this merit with all the people all around the world who might be going through some amount of suffering, wherever they might be. May all these blessings and thoughts of goodwill and sharing of vibrations bring people all around the world peace, harmony, and of course, health. Take care, and wishing all of you all the very best. Have a lovely rest of the day. Therwan Sarnai.
Everyone, Bhante.